Mishram sir, I just want to inform everybody that we are currently live on Facebook and YouTube, and we are audible and visible by the audience.
Okay.
Thank you.
You are not going to be visible.
No, Sunil, sometimes these backgrounds
Yes.
really distort the image when you move around.
So I won't move around.
Yeah, stay steady.
Professor UG Kaji, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hello.
Professor Visar, good evening.
Good to see you, Rohiji.
Oh, nice to see you.
Kailash.
Kailash.
Goodness.
Hi, Sarosh, can you hear me?
Yeah, Rohit. How are you?
Fine. It's good to see you.
It's late in the evening for you.
Yes, 11 to 10 p.m.
Really?
It's nice to see you bright.
Hi, Kailash. It's Hadi here.
Hi, Hadi.
Hi. Suresh, I also asked Peter Misra to join. I sent him the link.
There.
Oh,
Peter's
Hadi.
there.
Peter, you're here. Right.
Hi,
well done.
Hadi.
I'm glad you made it. Excellent.
Goodness.
I thought I'd get you into the picture. Right. Great.
Is it the right? No.
Hey, Ravi.
Hey, Peter.
We were wondering what that bedroom scene was about. And then we realized it's Ravi.
Kailash. Yeah.
Oh, hi, Satish.
Good evening, everyone.
And the bed is made, Kailash, the bed is made and very neat. Good evening.
So, Dr. Mishram, should I open the room to start?
Yeah, you open the room. Yeah.
Sure.
So tell us when to start.
How do you do this?
Yeah, we can start after 1 minute. We just opened the room, so after 1 minute you can start.
Right.
Good evening, Gagan.
Good evening, sir. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
So all Dr. Wadia's students and his entire legacy is here. Of course, Madam is there.
As one musician said, this Dr. Wadia's Gharana.
Yeah. I was trying to get the right word, but you actually said it.
No, well, I think
No, but this is an actual incidence.
Gharana may have not be the right word, Sarosh.
So the previous, all the inspirational persons in Dr. Meshram's series, someone whom I never had any personal contact, but this is, today I can say that I had personal contact with Professor Wadia, not once, but many times. And so it's all the more, all the series are very emotional, but this one, I'm sure it's going to be much more emotional for all of us.
Gagan, we can start.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Meshram, and welcome everyone. Welcome all the galaxy of experts. And as Dr. Professor Katrak rightly put it, from Professor Noshiraj Wadia's Gharana. And of course, leading the Gharana is, of course, Madam Dr. Piroja Wadia, who's been his, who was his wife and companion for a long period. So it's such a great privilege that so many stalwarts, so many experts, so many people who were extremely close to Professor Wadia are here today on this platform. Of course, the chairperson for today's platform is Professor Arjun Das, but there are so many people who need to be introduced. Well, not introduced, but spoken about and mentioned by the course director, Dr. Chandrasekhar Meshram. As every time, you know, the previous 4 or 5 occasions, the meetings have been just wonderful, and I'm looking forward to this meeting, looking to know more about the person whom I had met and whom I admired in my early formative years in neurology. So I will not spend any more time. Dr. Meshram, please introduce the chairperson, introduce the subject, the speakers, and all others in this house. Dr. Meshram, please.
Yeah, no, thank you, Dagan. Dear friends, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I welcome you all on behalf of Tropical and Geographical Neurology Specialty Group of World Federation of Neurology and Indian Academy of Neurology, which have come together to organize this important series, Inspiring People in Neurosciences. In this series, we learn about legends who have done outstanding work in the field of neurosciences. The idea is to ignite young minds to do exceptional work in the field of their choice. Today, we have 6th session, and I welcome you all for this session. Inspirational person today is Professor Noshir Wadia, father of Indian neurology and doyen of world neurology. I must mention that tropical neurology was very close to his heart, and we had dedicated to him the first International Tropical Neurology Conference in 2017 in Mumbai, and which was a landmark conference. Many of us in India could not have got the opportunity to work with the likes of previous inspirational persons like Miller Fisher, Raymond Adams, John Newsom Davis, David Marsden, but we are inspired by and mentored by the greats like Noshir Wadia, B.S. Singhal, J.S. Chopra, G. Arjun Das, Professor Ramamurthy, and many others in the country. I am happy that Professor B.S. Singhal, an inspirational person himself, is talking about another inspirational person, Professor Wadia. Warm welcome to you, sir. To chair this important session, we have another inspirational person, Professor G. Arjun Das. Professor Arjun Das is Professor Emeritus, Dr. MGR Medical University, Chennai, India. He is visiting Professor Neurology, Madras Medical College. He is trained in general medicine at same institute and in neurology at National Institute, Queen Square, London, and Moss Day Hospital in 1961 and New York Hospital in 1961 again. He is founder fellow of Indian Academy of Neurology. So Sir Arjun Das is a founder president, Indian Stroke Association, and he is visiting professor to several national and international universities. He has been the president of Neurological Society of India, founder president of Indian Epilepsy Society, and he is chair of the Neuro Updates Trust and organizes international neurology updates every year in the month of January for last so many years. He started the first stroke unit in India in 1989 which is one of the largest center in Asia today. He has research interest in tuberculous meningitis, epilepsy, peripheral neuropathy, stroke, teaching, and general neurology. He has more than 100 papers and textbook chapters, and is very active at the age of 92 years. Warm welcome you to sir. I would also like to welcome the invited panelists for today's session. Dr. Mrs. Firoza Wadia, better half of Professor Noshir Wadia, and consultant neurophysiologist at Jaslok Hospital, Mumbai. Professor Sarosh Katrak, Emeritus Professor Neurology at JJ Group of Hospitals and Jaslok Hospital, Mumbai. He has been part of family of Professor Wadia. Professor Sunil Pandya, former professor and head, Department of Neurosurgery at KM Hospital, Mumbai. And he has various other interests like history of medicine and neurosciences, medical ethics, literature, especially biography, writing and publishing papers he conducts workshops on, and photography. Professor and Dr. Peter Mishra, who is trained with Professor Noshir Wadia, Firoza Wadia, Sarosh Katrak at the JJ and the Jaslok Hospital. But then he moved to London in the mid-80s, where he worked as consultant neurologist and neurophysiologist at National Hospital for Neurology. He continued Professor Wadia's tradition of clinical research and has published extensively in the field of neuromuscular diseases and dystonia. He is now semi-retired, but attends Imperial College London as honorary consultant neurophysiologist. Peter is avid traveler and writer, and he has published a book on short stories. Another panelist, we have Professor Satish Khadilkar, who is Dean at the Bombay Hospital Institute of Medical Sciences, and he's a neuromuscular disease specialist. And Professor Louis Kaplan will join soon. He's a professor of neurology, Harvard University, and neurologist, Beth Israel Dekunis Medical Center, Boston, USA. Dr. K. Ravishankar is consultant in charge of headache and migraine clinic at Jaslok and Lilavati Hospital, Mumbai. He's trained at Houston Headache Clinic and the City of London Headache Clinic. He has been on the board of trustees of International Headache Society. So I would like to welcome all the invited panelists, and I take this opportunity to welcome some distinguished personalities for this session. Professor U.G. Kaji, first Vice President of WFN, Professor Wolfgang Griswold, Secretary General of WFN, IN President, WFN Trustee, Professor Steve Lewis, and Professor Marianne Visser, President-elect Dr. Nirmal Surya, Professor Kailash Bhatia, who's been Professor Wadia's student and now a movement disorder specialist at Queen Square, London, Professor Hadi Manji, past Secretary of Indian Academy of Neurology, Dr. Gagandeep Singh. We also have Professor J.M.K. Murthy, who is President of Indian Academy of Neurology. So Secretary General of Tropical and Geographical Neurology Specialty Group of WFN, Professor Marco Tulio Medina, and Dr. Meenakshi Sundaram, who is a consultant neurologist and Secretary of Indian Academy of Neurology, and Dr. Mohit Bhatt, who is a movement disorder specialist in Mumbai. So I welcome all the panelists and distinguished people in the room. And I'm very sure that this session is going to be extremely wonderful, because in this session, The stalwarts will talk about the stalwart, and there will be heart-to-heart talk, brain-to-brain talk, mind-to-mind talk. Now I hand over to Professor Arjun Das. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All my greetings to all my friends. Haven't seen them for a long time. Firoza, Gagandeep, of course, I have seen here. Suresh, and Murthy. I traced back my connection with Wadia, 1957. I took the right route and reached India. He took the wrong route and he got held up. We were wondering where he was, but he finally arrived. And I known him since he started working in Mumbai. I started working in India. All of you must remember that the first thing that started in India was neurosurgery. The neurosurgeons ruled the world in India. It's only some of us, when you came back, we started neurology as a separate subject. He was one of the pioneers. So it was wonderful to hear about him. We are very close. I'm sorry, Feroza, I knew him earlier than you, I think. But interesting, when I went to National Hospital, Queen Square in 56, he said, where do you come from? I said, do you know Noshir Wadia? He said, yes, I know him. But who asked me pretty girls, nurses there? He was such a hot person there, and people, all of us had to measure up to him in that famous place, Queen Square. So I'm so happy we're talking about my friend. One thing I can never forget, when we started as examiners, we were very particular about knowing the fine prints in the student. And he called me aside and said, Arjun, we don't need all researchers. We need neurologists in this country. There are no neurologists in this country. So we will examine from that point of view. Is he going to be a working neurologist and good teacher? That's what I learned from him. Otherwise, we are being very particular about this small thing, that thing. So he was such a practical man and a very good friend, very good friend. I'm sorry. I am the only probably left from that group at present, talking of Noshir Wadia, Eddie Barucha, Baldev Singh. So I'm just happy to be alive to meet you all guys and see how much it has developed in our country. Thank you very much. Shall we start the meeting? Where is, I can't see Beam.
I'm here.
Yeah, but where are you? I can't see you. You're behind the screen. Okay.
Yeah, can you project Professor Singhal's CV?
Where is it? You got it? I got it in my mind, but not on the paper. Beam Singhal is one of those quiet, very fit person. When he walks, you can't keep pace with him, even now. So Beam is, there was no neurology, there was no Bombay hospital when we started life. Now, of course, Professor Beam Singhal, Director of Neurosciences, Bombay Hospital Institute of Medical Sciences, Mumbai. He was Vice President and Regional Director of Asian Oceanic Association of Neurology in 2004-2008, Chair MDS AOS 2009 to 2011, founder Parkinson's. He is one of the pioneers, movement disorders in our country, Parkinson's Movement Disorder Society, President Neurological Society of India, and so many awards, BC Award, Walcott Award, 200 articles in national and international journals. His present interest is Parkinson's disease, movement disorders, MS, and myasthenia gravis. Neurology Found, he runs a beautiful program. Every year, there's an update in Bombay. Neurology Foundation runs a program like Sahai, Upchar, Anchal, Vidya, Parvarish. That covers almost everything. He's the organizing chairman of that, I told you, the most useful update in Mumbai neurology every year since 1996. There's a rush of DM postgraduate to his. So most important about him is he is kept fit. You see, most of us grown, yeah, but not all are fit like him. He literally runs when he walks. So, welcome, Beam. Lovely to see you, so active. God bless you. Please talk about Noshi. Yes, Beam,
Can you?
ready?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Arjun. Very kind words. And I'd like to thank Dr. Meshram of the tropical and geographical subsection of the World Federation of Neurology, Dr. J.M.K. Murthy, for giving me the opportunity to talk to you all about, my mentor or my hero, Professor Wadia. Greetings to you all from Mumbai. I shall begin my presentation. I share the screen, and I think we'll have to slideshow. I think Professor Noshir Homaji Wadia is truly a very, very inspiring doctor. You are my mentor and my guru. What I am today is only because of Professor Noshir Wadia. At the very outset, I'd like to acknowledge with great gratitude that many of the people who have provided me with photographs and material that I needed.
Sir, we can't see. We can't see your screen. We can't see your screen.
Yeah. Do you need to see me? How will
We
that
need
be?
to see
Your
your
screen,
screen,
sir. Your screen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can't see the screen?
No, no.
Can't see
No,
your
sir.
slides.
How come?
Sir,
How come?
PowerPoint presentation, sir, needs to be shared.
I'm sharing the screen.
Uh,
Your PowerPoint.
I share the screen. Share.
Yes, sir. Now we can see
Now you can see
your
the
screen,
screen.
sir. And now you
Yeah.
open the. Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes, sir.
So I'm talking about, can you see the screen now?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
So
Yes,
I'm talking about Professor Noshir Wadia, a truly inspiring doctor, my mentor or my guru, the architect of my career. And at the very outset, I'd like to express my gratitude to many who responded to my requests for photographs or material that I needed, starting with Mrs. Wadia. She was very, very quick in responding. Professor Sarosh Katrak and his wife Ahalya, very, very kind indeed. Mohit Bhatt, Professor Dr. Jahangir Sorabji, who interviewed Dr. Wadia. He gave me the, whatever he had interviewed, Dr. Satish Khadelkar, and of course, Dr. Sunil and Shubha Pandya. I'm extremely, extremely obliged to them for giving me the material, some of which I think has been given to me by them. There are many tributes that we can give to Professor Wadia. World famous neurologist, I think he is internationally renowned, father of Indian neurology, a great teacher. I learned the essentials of neurology from Dr. Wadia, a great clinical researcher, mentor for many. I think many of his legacy you will see, many friends and admirers in India and abroad. So Professor Wadia, really, there are many things that we can say about him. I had a very, very long association with Dr. Wadia. I was his registrar from 1957 to 59. I was a junior assistant at the JJ Hospital and GMC from 62 to 81. And in between, of course, when I was in England, where he had introduced me and got me the job, I think he was always in touch with me. Even after Dr. Wadia's retirement, I continued to seek his counsel and advised his passing away in 2016. So it was a very association. When I was doing a post my general medicine, and Dr. Narula, my registrar, he told me that you must get the job of registrar under Dr. Wadia. And when I followed him, it was really revealing to me how neurology should be looked into and how the patient should be treated. Dr. Wadia, as you know, belonged to the Parsi community, Zoroastrian, who arrived in India in the 8th century from Persia, having been persecuted by the invading Arabs. They landed in Sanjan in Gujarat. where they're very well welcomed by the Hindu ruler, Chari Raja. And the Parsi priest, told the ruler, they will gel in the community like sugar mixed with milk. And indeed, as you know, Parsis have made very important contributions in the progress of India. The very notable names, Dadabhai Neurology, economist and political activist, Sir Jamshedji Jiji Boy, Dorabji Tata in the Tata House, Ratan Tata now, Sir Firoz Shah Mehta, who was the co-founder of the Indian National Congress, Homi Jahangir Bhabha, who was a nuclear scientist. Unfortunately, we lost him in the air crash. And of course, another legend, Professor Noshir Thomasji Wadia, 20th January 25 to 10th of April 20. He, of course, was father of contemporary Indian neurology. He was born in Surat, not very far away from India, about 3.5 to 4 hours by train ride or by car. He was born on 20th of January 1925. But most of his education was in Mumbai. His pre-medical education was the famous St. Xavier's College in Mumbai. You can see the quadrangle of the St. Xavier's College, not very far away from the hospital where I work. His medical education, MBBS and MD, was from the Grant Medical College, the famous college, my alma mater, which was founded in 1845. The building that you see still stands. And this was, of course, by a large contribution was given by some Jamshedji Jiji Boy. He donated a large fund for the creation of the JJ Hospital. And we have a statue of Jamshedji Jiji Boy as we enter the Grand Medical College new building. It is MD degree from the Bombay University in 1950. At that time, many people wanted to go overseas to do the MRCP. There was a special attraction. Dr. Wadia, immediately after the MD, set sail by boat for UK to do his MRCP, which he cleared at the very first attempt in 1952. His interest in neurology was kindled when he attended the neurology case demonstrations at the Institute of Neurology, Queen's Care, before doing MRCP. These demonstrations are still held, and I'm sure Professor Kailash Bhatia is holding the demonstration someday or the other. And this is the Institute of Neurology, where Dr. Kailash Bhatia works now. And we have, this is a later picture. You can see Dr. P.K. Thomas and McDonald and Ita Harding sitting in the front row. These lectures have still been continued. I don't know, Wednesday or Thursday, probably Thursdays now. In the UK, he had done his MRCP. Now the whole difficulty was that he was overqualified for the job of the house physician. He applied at other places, but they only told him that, look, you're overqualified and you are not sufficiently experienced to become a registrar. So therefore, he had to hunt for the job. And the first job he got in the neurosurgery at the Newcastle General Hospital under the senior neurosurgeon, Mr. George Robotham. Here's a picture, it was very kind of Dr. David Bates to give me the picture of Professor Robotham, neurosurgeon at Newcastle General Hospital. I'm told that he entered the theater only once. He was given some task and he did so miserably that I think he was asked to stay on the wards only, but he wrote excellent histories there. And Mr. Robotham was very, very pleased with him and he introduced him. And this is, of course, when he was the house physician at the surgery department. He introduced him to Lord Russell Brain, a celebrated neurologist. I think we all know about him, president of the Royal College of Physicians, and then editor of Brain, chairman of the Royal Commission, and he wrote at a very young age, Disease of the Nervous System. And he was, of course, connected with the Maida Vale Hospital and the London Hospital, and he was also fellow of the Royal Society. This is the Maida Vale Hospital where Dr. Wadia was working. This hospital was, by the voluntary contribution. This, unfortunately, this hospital no longer exists. 1993, it was Dr. Wadia was resident in neurology in 1952. Now, I think this is a very homely place. It was connected with the Institute of Neurology, Queen's Square. Now, he had a dilemma. Many people were advising Dr. Wardia that you come back to India and practice as a physician and as a neurologist. But so I think Dr. Wardia decided to take the advice of Sir Russell Brain then. And Dr. McDonald Fishley, another giant of a neurologist, had just returned from India after visiting Mumbai. So Dr. Russell Brain knew about this. So he said he will probably inquire from him. And the thing was that he said that there is a possibility of another neurology department opening up. And therefore, Sir Russell Brain advised him to do some more experience. And he also arranged for him the registrar post at the London Hospital. Now, this is the Royal London Hospital in Whitechapel. And Dr. Wardia was the first Asian to be appointed to this hospital, thanks to Sir Russell Brain. And here's a picture taken, along with him. You can see Sir Russell Brain sitting in the middle. To his left is Dr. Wardia. To Russell Brain's right side is the Ironside, who was the dean. And to his right is the Shepherd, who wrote an article with Dr. Wardia. And then there is also the extreme left is Dr. Oppenheimer, the neuropathologist. And to the extreme right is the Alan Downey, who was the house officer. Dr. Henson was very, very fond of Dr. Wardia. He was assistant to Dr. Sir Russell Brain. He was also the dean of the Maida Hospital. And Dr. Henson advised him that, look, if you wish to become senior registrar, you will have to write an article. So Dr. Wardia really got down and he wrote a very important observation on atypical features of acoustic neuroma, along with his colleague, Dr. Shepherd, who was the neurosurgical registrar. And also he wrote another article of venous sign and cerebral angioma. And both articles were published in Brain. And in the acoustic neuroma, the observations really were quite different than what had been earlier described. These are the people who had difficulty in walking, and they also have cognitive decline due to the hydrocephalus. Now, returning to India after training in UK, he was interviewed for a position in India by no less than a committee which had been sent to London for a post in All India Institute of Medical Sciences by Sir Lakshman Swami Mudaliar and his team. And Dr. Wardia waited for a letter from them for appointment. But I think several months passed, but there was no response at all. In that case, he wrote to Professor Jacob Chandy at Vellore, who offered the position to him immediately. But Dr. Wardia realized that may not be suitable for him. Missionary hospital perhaps also has a very low salary. And of course, his alma mater was the Grant Medical College. So he wrote to Dr. Shantilal Mehta, a very noted surgeon who was the dean of the JJ Hospital. He, of course, immediately gave him a letter of appointment, but with the caveat that he must return within 6 months to start the department. That, of course, deprived him of spending some more time in neuropathology by Professor Dorothy Russell, who was very world-famous neuropathologist. Anyway, he returned to India and joined the JJ Hospital and Grant Medical College on 3rd of January, 57, under the unit of Dr. Menino D'Souza. Menino D'Souza was a very kind-hearted person, extremely kind-hearted. And he had spent some time at the Queen's Square, and he was, in fact, doing a general medical unit in neurology. But Dr. Wardia, and he was appointed was asked to develop the neurological services in the Grant Medical College and JJ Hospital. He was assigned a house physician, a registrar. There were some other neurology teachers already present in Mumbai at that time. At the KEM Hospital, we had Dr. Eddie Parucha, Dr. Anil Desai, and we also had the neurosurgical, Dr. R.G. Ginde and Dr. Homi Dastu. But in the Grant Medical College, Dr. Wardia was the only neurologist. He was the assistant honorary neurologist. Then he became honorary professor 68 to 82. He was recognized teacher in neurology for DM in 75. And after retirement, he was made consultant for life. Now, it was very difficult in those days to set up services in neurology in those days. Dr. Menino D'Souza, of course, gave him the full liberty. But Dr. Wardia missed what he had in UK. He had no secretary, no dictaphone, state-of-the-art equipment, no dedicated department record department, no neurology library. So he had to face all these difficulties, and yet he was also given a non-functioning EEG machine where the wires had been bitten up by the rats. I think for not functioning. That was the only instrument or appliance that he got. But lucky for him that soon in 1958, only a year later, two people joined him. One was his old grand, very, very close friend of his, Dr. Gajendra Singh, who was a neurosurgeon who was trained at Bangalore, and another was Dr. Jimmy Sidhwa, a neuroradiologist. He was extremely good neuroradiologist. So Dr. Wadia was lucky to have these two colleagues join him. He had a vision of Department of Neurology and how the services should grow, not only in the city, but also in the whole of the Maharashtra state. So he really drew up a diagram of how the setup should be, the center and periphery, and how the clinical research should go on, and neurosurgery, radiology. And he took the diagram of the plan to the dean, Dr. Quadros, who was the dean. And he really thought, he said, look, what is this? I mean, there are people who are starving and you're talking of expanding the neurological services. And he really, didn't show any interest in whatever Dr. Wadia had planned. In those days, as you know, I think the services with Dr. Jimmy Sidhwa and the others, these are the things, which are probably historical value. The angiography was done by a direct puncture of the carotid artery. And you see a picture on the right side, which is, of course, of a tuberculous meningitis showing the arterial narrowing. And, of course, the pneumoencephalography also the myelography by using the contrast media. Now, these were the techniques that were available in those days, but to get the plates also was difficult. So Dr. Wadia had to face a lot of difficulties at that time. There were no CT scanners or MRIs. These tools were not available. Every day we, began the round. He always was very punctual in coming to the department, and we looked to his arrival. He always had very, very interesting cases to narrate, which served as a good teaching lesson. So he told us about a case that he had seen in an institution where the patient had a fluctuating drowsiness after a minor little fall, and he suspected subdural hematoma and he requested Dr. Shantilal Mehta to operate. And it did turn out to be subdural hematoma. So I think from a clinical assessment, Dr. Wadia had something or the other interesting to tell us about and we also had interesting case referrals from the other hospitals because there were not neurology in the other places. There were several neurologists who showed interest in visiting the department of Dr. Wadia. We had Dr. P.K. Thomas, Christopher Pallis, who was at the Hammersmith Hospital, Professor Spillan, Brian Matthews, who was at Oxford, Maurice Victor, who came from Raymond Adams, Miller Fisher, who was visiting Professor Wadia for Dalal as well, Sir John Walton, and many others. Now, what the duties were, Dr. Wadia was supposed to be at the JJ Hospital as an honorary. Only subsistence was that they were allowed the conveyance charges. That too, probably not enough. Probably 100 rupees or 150 rupees in those days. But he always was there punctually at the time and would not leave before that, 8:30 to 12:30 p.m., but available at all times. You could give him a call and he would come in the evening. He will come on Sundays. On Tuesdays, he was a great organizer. On Tuesdays, which even continue today, there were joint rounds. They were, we would assemble in a hall and the cases would be presented and discussed. All the registrars and other people were also welcome. On Thursdays, he organized the teaching sessions for the postgraduate students. And on every Saturday, there was a rotating neuroscience meeting. And in the evening, of course, he had to do do some clinic for the private patients because that was the only way to subsist. This is the hall where the meetings were held, and this hall has been named as Moshe Wadia Conference Hall. And this is where he used to practice in the evening for a limited time, 4 to 8. On Wednesdays, the JJ Hospital, which continue, we had a busy outpatient clinic We all attended the clinic along with Dr. Wadia. But there was one policy which he followed, I think, which is important, which unfortunately is not followed even today. He would always want the referring doctor to send a summary and the reason why the case is referred. Otherwise, he would turn the case back to the GT hospital or St. George's. On Thursdays, there were postgraduate teaching sessions, well attended. Students from KEM Hospital, Nair Hospital, SAN attended. And the teaching was very simple, even carpal tunnel syndrome, ulnar neuropathy, leprous neuropathy, myelopathy, strokes. The main thing that he taught us, which we still follow, that where is the lesion? What is the pathology? Is it improving, deteriorating, static? Then you think of the etiology. And this you start summarizing and thinking about this even from the history that you're taking. And I think this has served, I think the neurologists in generally to have a very good clinical sense. And in the rotating neuroscience meetings, we will visit the JJ Hospital, KEM, Nair Hospital. So they will rotate. And they're very interesting case sessions discussed. By that time, there were two other one neurosurgeon and neurologist had joined, which made the thing even more interesting. Dr. Bhagwati has joined as a neurosurgeon, and Dr. Dalal at the Nair Hospital after training from Miller Fisher and Ray Adams at the Nair Hospital from 62 onwards. And in the evenings, Dr. Wadia, along with his colleague, Dr. B.S. Moose, Baji Kolawala, Dalal, Anil Desai, they had a very interesting clinical session in the evening at the Parsi General Hospital. And, he made me, as a registrar, present the case of Wilson's disease, which he had picked up at Jaipur. And now this KF rings, you can see in the patient. And Dr. Wadia, this is, given by Dr. Mohit Bhatt. You can see the classical faces of the patient with the Wilson's disease. And I'm grateful to Dr. Mohit Bhatt, who is now well recognized for his work on Wilson's disease. Dr. Wadia was also requested at that time in 1960 to join by the Ministry of Labor and Employment of Government of India to visit the manganese mines because there were some neurological cases. So Dr. Wadia visited that and they made a report on that. And this some of the patients he brought to JJ Hospital, and you can see the pseudo laughter in these patients that they also had an abnormal gait. And this is a picture again given by Dr. Mohit Bhatt to me. And Dr. Mohit Bhatt was kind enough to give me the subsequent MRI in these patients where you can see the manganese in the bell ganglia. Now this also was presented by him at the first International Symposium on Tropical Neurology in Buenos Aires in Argentina, which was held on 29th of November to 2nd of December, 61. You can see in the picture, Dr. Wadia is seated, you can see with the headphones. There's a Professor Contour to his right. And then J.D. Spillan was to his left. And then there Dr. Trellis, Housey, and Dr. Wadia was in conversation with Professor House. And he presented this picture about the manganese on this topic of neurology. This was the proceedings of the first international symposium, which was organized by the World Federation of Neurology and the Argentinian Society. Now, this is what happens. Dr. Wadia was the political prisoner because India had invaded Goa. As a result, Portugal was at war with India. And Dr. Wadia did not know. He had taken a Pan Air flight for Buenos Aires via Lisbon, Portugal. But, news and I think the language barrier, he didn't know about it. And he took that flight. And when they landed at Lisbon, they were taken off along with the 4 others, Dr. Mahimdura and 3 others who were returning. And they were put in the jail. This is the view of the prison. I think you can see the jail and you can see the toilet in that. And this is the jail, where they were housed. And fortunately, the other colleagues helped him. And I think, he was released. I think fortunately, he didn't have to stay in the jail for a very long time. It was probably about 2.5 to 3 months. There was a lot of activity. I was in England at that time and we were wondering where Dr. Wadia is. And then we learned about him that he was in the jail. And here there's the International Red Cross and Amnesty International, Roman Catholic Church and the Pope involved. Foreign Secretary of Government of India. And there were some exchanges of the prisoners, an icon from Cathedral of Saints. And then Dr. Wadia was released on 20th of February, 1962. So this was, but even when he was in the prison, he was still thinking about the Department of Neurology at the Grand Medical College. So that was, all the time in his mind. When he returned, he, of course, received a great, reception. You can see all the students gathering, and Dr. Wadia is there. I think I can't really show the picture to you, but you can see him with his mustache and the garland around him and all the students surrounding him. So there was a great return of the hero, a great reception for him. And Dr. Wadia was with his mother, Dinbai, whom he loved very intensely. And by the way, Dr. Wadia, during these 5 years that he was there, he never came back to India. But his mother did visit him. Dr. Wadia wonders, about the motive of her visit. But nevertheless, I think he really enjoyed that mother visited him. Many years later, along with Mr. Wadia, Dr. Wadia had been treating a consul general of the Portugal, and they took him back to show him, where he was in the prison. So you can see Dr. Wadia, Mrs. Wadia, and the Portuguese consul. On his return in 1962, there were some changes in the campus. The old campus still stands, and you can see the anatomy hall, which we still have, where the conferences are held. But there's a new building had come up through the efforts of Shantilal Mehta. And fortunately for Dr. Wadia, now we had the 4th floor, a very good department of the neurology, where we also had the conference hall and a special office for him. Another thing which happened in 1962, that there was a good neuropathology department at the Tata Hospital under ICMR, which was dissolved. And therefore, Dr. Wadia's efforts, Dr. Dastoor joined the JJ Hospital in 1962. We had several brain cutting sessions, and there were several publications. And we also had weekly sessions of brain cutting at the JJ Hospital through the courtesy of Dr. Dastoor. Very interesting. I must acknowledge the 2 persons who visited, who contributed very significantly to the growth of the neurology in the JJ Hospital. One was Dr. Anil Patel. I think we may remember Jim Toole. Along with Jim Toole, he wrote a book on cerebrovascular diseases. He was a very intense person. He would visit the hospital, see some interesting cases, go back, study, and want to write an article. Another person who joined, or rather who was in the plastic department of Dr. Atia doing the EMG services, she had gone only for 2 or 3 months for a visit to a department. On the way back, she picked up a machine, and she really was an innovator. She did tremendous work on the EMG department, setting up the thing. Her main interest, of course, was leprosy. You can see her with a colleague taking the director of the leprosy mission. So she also had done a PhD, and she had written a lot of work on the leprosy. That has been her main interest, but she really was an outstanding electrophysiologist. Here you can see her doing the EMG. Then, of course, the department was taken over by Dr. Piroza Irani, who is now Mr. Wadia. She was electrodiagnostician in charge of the EEG and EMG after completing fellowship at the National Hospital for Nervous Disease in London. She became the visiting officer also for the EMG for the NIH project. And entirely through her efforts, India joined the International Clinical Neurophysiology Society. And she really did commendable work in the EMG and the EEG. Now I must move on to Dr. Wadia's membership of the national and international societies and international recognition. He was president of the Neurological Society of India in 1963 and 64. Two other important prestigious things. He was elected fellow of the National Academy of Medical Sciences in 1972. He was also elected fellow of the Indian National Science Academy. These elections are extremely difficult. I don't know many other people who may have been elected fellows from the neurology section. He also was a member of the scientific board of the Indian Council of Medical Research, the main body which promotes the research in India from 1989 to 91. And he was also chairman of the governing body and later president of the C. Chitra Tirunal Institute of Medical Sciences down south in Thiruvananthapuram, in Kerala. That institute is a very famous institute, and Radhakrishnan, the famous, epilepsy person, set up the department there, and there's a lot of good work done on surgery for epilepsy over there. And Dr. Wadia used to visit as the chairman and later as the president. Of course, he became a member of several international associations, many of them honorary, Argentina, Chilean Society. He also became fellow of the Royal College of Physicians of London, fellow of the American Neurological Association. He became an honorary fellow and member of the Association of British Neurologists. So several recognitions came from the International Association. Very important, he became a special consultant to the Institutes of Neurological Diseases and Blindness and also the National Institute of NIH in America in 1961. A very, very rare distinction. He received a large PL480 grant for a major collaborative project on nutrition disorders of the nervous system between NIH and the neuroscience departments of JJ Hospital. In the World Federation of Neurology also, he made great contributions. He was vice president from 89 to 93. He was a founder member and chairman of the Tropical Neurology Research Group, to which Dr. Meshram alluded. He was chairman of the WFN Ataxia Research Group because of his work I'll show you later on ataxia. And he was a member of the several WFN committees, name the committee, education, steering, nomination committees. So he played a very important role in the World Federation of Neurology. Here he is, in a meeting, in the Ataxia Research Group meeting in Lisbon, along with his colleagues. Not only in the academic activities, Dr. Wadia also took part in the sports. He was, in fact, played cricket, and Dr. Gajan Singh and he were very keen cricket players. And his students loved him, and he made him the chairman of GMC Gymkhana. And he was responsible for renovation of the GMC Gymkhana by collecting the necessary funds. So, it was not only academic activities, but his students really loved him for his many interests. In 1973, Shantilal Mehta invited him to join the J.J. Jaslow Hospital and Medical Research Center as the director of the Department of Neuroscience. And under his leadership, it has become a center of excellence in India. After his retirement in 2010, in appreciation of his services at the Jaslow Hospital, he was appointed director emeritus. And you can see the Jaslow Hospital is a very prestigious hospital, also a training center. And this is distinguished faculty at the Jaslow Hospital. You can see Homi Dastu, Anil Desai, Mr. Wadia, Dr. Wadia, Gajan Singh. Person who is missing here is Saroj Kartak, but I wonder, because of his interest in photography, whether he was taking the photograph. And here, Mr. Wadia, she was in charge of the EEG and EMG department, and she was doing the EMG at the Jaslow Hospital. Not only that, I might mention here that she had organized two very, very outstanding neurophysiology meetings. And she had invited the Neuro International faculty, Dr. Robin Willison of Queen Square, Soerberg from Copenhagen, and Erik Stallberg, who is famous for his single fiber studies in myasthenia gravis from Sweden. So one in the 70s, and then another meeting in 1980s. And again, she invited Robin Willison, Erik Stallberg, but Austin Sumner, who of course is famous for his work on neurophysiology, neuropathies, and Dr. Nick Murray from UK. I remember attending these meetings, and really, it was a great learning experience. It was very well attended, excellent meeting.
Monday to tomorrow 10:30 a.m. India time.
And there you see relaxing, after these meetings. I think you can see Elia on the left side, standing there, Mr. Wadia. You can see Saroj Kaptarak, very, very person. And you can, of course, see who is doing it now. And he contributed very significantly as a clinical research. I think he had more than 140, I think more than 150 publications, national and international peer-reviewed journals. He contributed several chapters in several books. He edited the popular book on neurological practice, Indian Perspective. There are, articles he wrote on the Wilson disease in 4 Indian families. He had picked up those cases, and there were also some unusual aspects. They also had some sort of renal rickets. And he also wrote on the toxic effects of the heavy metals on the nervous system in the Indian neurology, India. But in the earlier, Dr. Wadia was, because of his clinical ability, he realized the high cervical cord lesion. And when he did the X-ray, and he found that there was congenital abnormalities, congenital intertextual dislocation, which you can see that there was a dislocation and and occipitalization of the atlas. So I think you can see these things. I don't know if I can show the arrow. Yeah, I can show. You can see the orientoid pair going up. You can see the occipitalization. You can see the compression. So he wrote an article on that. And I think he presented in the WFN conference in Barcelona. They also worked on the tuberculous spinal arachnoiditis, where they demonstrated that sometimes the presentation may not be due to meningitis, but maybe directly due to the involvement of the spinal cord. Along with Dr. Dastu, they wrote 2 seminal papers in neurological sciences in 69, the 2 sections, clinical and radiological features, and also the pathology and the pathogenesis. And you can see here some of the enhancement of the meninges that you can see in these patients. He also wrote on the nutrition disorders, several articles, pattern of nutrition deficiency disorders of nervous system in Bombay, along with R.K. Swami, where he was a registrar, and also the role of vegetarianism, smoking, and hydrocobalamine in optic neuritis. So I think there were several papers that contributed, and I think Mr. Wadia also contributed the articles on the nutrition disorders. And this is one of the articles where she did the electromyography. This is due to the vitamin D deficiency, osteomalacia, and they have a proximal muscle weakness with a lot of pain. And of course, in the EMG, you find some non-specific changes. So these can be confused with polymyositis or muscular dystrophy, but this is due to osteomalacia. Dr. Wadia also had interest in multiple sclerosis. In fact, he really made me take interest in multiple sclerosis. And one of the papers that we wrote down very early, before the MRI, was profile of multiple sclerosis in the Bombay region, and that was using the Shoemaker criteria. But following the article that Nadir Bharucha wrote, on the epidemiology, and showing that the multiple sclerosis were more common in the Parsis, there was another article by Dr. Wadia and Kailash Bhatia on multiple sclerosis more prevalent in the Russians, supporting the concept, or the article of Dr. Bharucha. You can see Dr. Wadia here sharing the dais with Professor Charles Poser, who, as you know, was a great authority, and Poser criteria were also used for some time in the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. Of course, nowadays we use the Ian McDonald criteria. But Dr. Wadia shared the platform with Charles Poser because of his interest in multiple sclerosis. But most important, Dr. Wadia's paper was a new form of heredofamilial spinocerebellar degeneration with slow eye movements. He described 9 families along with Dr. Swami, who was the registrar. This work was spread over several decades, and the main clinical features were the autosomal dominant, a very slow saccades of the eye movements, and they also, with the German collaboration, demonstrated the degeneration in the PPRF, parapontine reticular formation. And later on, the genetics were worked out as SCA2. And this, of course, is a very common form of dominant cerebral ataxia that we see in India. And this is, I mean, these are the people who are, there's no video of that, but these are the people, who are jerking their head to move the eyes rather than moving the eyes. And this is the pathology of you can see the atrophy of the pons and the cerebellum in these patients. There was another condition which was very prevalent in Japan, and there was an outbreak of subacute myelooptic neuropathy in which they lose the vision and also develop the spinal cord disturbances. And in 1978, the Tokyo court ruled out that this was ruled that cleoquinol of Ciba Geigy was responsible. And Dr. Wadia was requested to represent the Ciba Geigy. He made few trips to Japan for this, and he also tried to search extensively for Swan in Bombay. He wrote a paper, but I think the cases were very few, far between, and that was also suspect. And the drug, of course, was later on withdrawn in 1985. But one of the important things which happened during his business was that he was able to meet the virologist. I'll tell you about him, that there were 2 epidemics in India, in Mumbai, also, acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis. And some of these cases later on developed also neurological complications. So Dr. Wadia met Dr. Kono, who was demonstrated that EV70 virus was the cause of the acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis. And this was written up, acute polio-like illness following acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis by Dr. Wadia, Mr. Irani, Dr. Wadia now, and Dr. Katrak in Lancet. And again, a second article again in Lancet by them. So I think we'll show you a picture. Polio-like for motor paralysis associated with acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis, EV70. And you can see Dr. Wadia relaxing, Mr. Wadia, Dr. Kono, and Dr. Katra. It's a rare picture. Dr. Wadia also wrote a very interesting article because neurocystic sarcosis, which interests Dr. Gandhi quite a bit. He has written extensively about it. But Dr. Wadia, along with Dr. Desai, his radiologist, and Dr. Mohit Bhatt, wrote down about disseminated cystic sarcosis and new observations. And you can see the disseminated cystic sarci in the brain, the autopsy also. And the important thing was the praziquantal, when given to these patients, they developed cerebral edema. And I think out of the 4 or 5 patients, 4 patients died. So I think it has to be remembered that disseminated cystic sarcosis treatment is not easy because drug, which is considered to be effective for cystic sarcosis, can also be a killer. Another event happened in India, which of course brought India also into great prominence, and that was the 14th World Conference of Neurology. A stamp paper was also issued, and this was Dr. Chopra had organized it very, very well, and Dr. Wadia also played a very significant role in the organization and the conducting of this conference. Dr. Wadia was invited by Dr. Spillan on the first book that he wrote, Dr. Spillan, on introduction on tropical neurology in 1973. And Dr. Wadia wrote an introduction to neurology in India, quite a famous article, which gives you quite a sort of information regarding the prevalence of the neurological illnesses in India. But Dr. Wadia himself then took on the task. And in January 2005, he edited a book on neurological practice by several authors, An Indian Perspective. Of course, the second edition was long overdue, and Dr. Satish Kharelkar, who is here, took on the task of bringing out the second edition of in November 2014. Indian Academy of Neurology, of course, has honored Dr. Wadia having an oration in his name at his annual meeting. And we have had several international experts. The first one, of course, was Professor Luke Kepler. We have also had Professor Arley, who was president of the World Federation of Neurology, Alistair Compton, who had done a lot of work on multiple sclerosis, Steve Wilton, Robert Griggs, Stephen Pulse, who has worked on ataxia, Professor Suji. And we have this Dr. Meshram mentioned about the neurology update meeting every once in 2 years. And Dr. Wadia has been our patron. You can see him talking about it and lighting the lamp. So Dr. Wadia has been our patron. The meetings are still continued. And Mr. Wadia graced us in the last meeting that we had in Mumbai before the pandemic. Dr. Wadia won several awards and accolades. You can see receiving the DSc degree from the Benares Hindu University from the governor of UP. He received the Lifetime Achievement Award in Medical Excellence by Harvard Medical International and the Wokhart Limited in 2003. And Doctor visited, he also, after that, he visited the Harvard. He gave a grand round over there. And here he is accepting the honor. He also received Dhanvantri Award in 2006. You can see Mr. Jayvanti Mehta and Dr. B.K. Goyal, giving him the award. He also received the Bombay Neurological Association Award. You can see Dr. Nirmal Surya. You can also see Dr. Charulata Sakla and Dr. Wadia smiling away. And of course, the very prestigious award which we have is the R.D. Birla Award for Outstanding Clinician in 1999. The first award, I think, Dr. Wadia received, and you can see Dr. P.K. Goyal and many luminaries of the Bombay Hospital. We have Mr. Taparia, B.K. Goyal, Dr. Bhagwati, Praful Bhagwati, Chief Justice. The persons are selected by a jury, and they're headed by Dr. Praful Bhagwati, Praful Bhagwati, Chief Justice. Of course, the very distinguished award we got from the WFN for Services of International Neurology at the Bangkok World Congress of Neurology in 2009. You can see Professor Arlie, Dr. Wadia, Rosenberg, Raj Shakir. And this is the award that Dr. Wadia got, the very, very prestigious award, the first award that was awarded. And of course, he was recognized by Government of India, was given Padma Bhushan by the President of India in 26th of January, our Republic Day, 2012. And you can see Dr. Wadia receiving the prestigious Padma Bhushan Award. And Dr. Wadia, of course, has been a teacher par excellence. And we have been the disciples of Dr. Wadia, me, and you can see with Dr. Wadia, Dr. Kathrak, a picture, given by Dr. Kathrak to me in January 79 taken. And amongst his, students who have made a big mark themselves, we have Professor Saroj Kathrak, Director of Neurology of the Just Road Hospital, just retired, Emeritus Professor of Neurology at the Grand Medical College. He also won several WFN honors. He got the Tad Munset Prize for Education. He continues to do the continuum even today. And he was the only one who gave the award, the Richard Boston oration at the 21st World Congress of Neurology in Vienna. So this is Professor Kathrak. And Professor Kailash Bhatia, I can't say much about him. He made a great mark for himself internationally at the Institute of Neurology in the movement disorders. And after Marsden, he has taken over the chair. He contributed very, very significantly, also started a journal on clinical neuro, on movement disorders. I think he has made a remarkable name for himself, and we're very, very proud of Professor Kailash Bhatia. And Dr. Mohit Bhatt, another, person, who has made a mark himself, the first person in the Parkinson's disease movement disorders in India, having got the training in Canada from Vancouver. And he's the director of neurology at Kokilaben Ambani Hospital. He's renowned for his work on Wilson's disease. He's also a very great painter. And his handwriting has remained immaculate. I don't know, over the years, handwriting has not changed at all. And we have also another person who was picked up by Professor Giggs when he visited India, Amit Mankodi. who is an investigator in hereditary muscle diseases. She's working at the National Institute of Neurological Sciences and Stroke. She's done a lot of excellent work. And we, of course, have Dr. Peter Mishra and Dr. Ravi Shankar. Dr. Wadia was very, very fond of both of them. Peter Mishra made a mark for himself in the neurophysiology at the Institute of Neurology, Queen Square. I don't know where he is now. And Dr. Ravi Shankar, as you know, is now internationally known, not only in India, abroad as well, for his work on hearing. And of course, Dr. Wadia was honored on his 75th birthday, teacher of teachers on his 75th birthday. A symposium was held and the gift was presented. And you can see Gajendra Singh, Mr. Wadia, Dr. Wadia, Sarosh Katra, and myself. And of course, it's a perfect couple. Dr. Wadia, of course, was very, I think the two of them made a perfect couple and loved each other immensely. And I think contributed very significantly. And this is what Dr. Wadia had to say about Mr. Wadia. Loving wife Piroja, to whom he paid a great tribute in his own words, I owe an immense debt of gratitude. My own, often unappreciated and silent partner in much of my work and research. And indeed, Mr. Wadia has contributed very significantly in all possible ways. And I think has been a perfect couple and perfect match for Dr. Wadia. And this is his legacy. I think there are many people that you can recognize here. Dr. Wadia seated. On to his left is Mr. Wadia. I'm seated on his right. To my right is Dr. Sarosh Katra. And to his right is Dr. Amroliwala. Dr. Amroliwala joined the Royal Air Force in England. He was a SPED student. To left of Mrs. Wadia is Dr. Neeta Mehta, who really became head of the Department of Grant Medical College, after, and of course to him is Radhakishan Shetty. Dr. Wadia was very fond of him, and he went to Manipal, Bangalore, and did excellent work. And in the seat behind, we have many of his students, which you can recognize. I think we have also got, I think if I start naming them all, we'll take it. Dr. Shishat is there, H.U. Srinivas is there, Mohit Bhatt is there, Rupur Sahani is there. So I think there are a lot of admirers and followers of his, and they've continued to light the lamp that Dr. Wadia lit and spread neurology all over, not only in India, but even abroad. So his students are all over the world. Dr. Wadia unfortunately passed away on 10th of April 2016. He will be sadly missed, but will never be forgotten. His teachings will continue to guide us and the succeeding generation of neurologists in India. And indeed, I think we remain indebted to him as father of contemporary Indian neurology. Thank you very much for paying attention to this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Veem. It was a wonderful journey. And almost some of us were reliving what you said about Noshir, those work with him. Thank you very much for the.
So I think maybe Arjun, you would like to invite the others to make some comments.
Sorry?
Maybe others may like to add something.
Oh, there's so many.
Yeah, Mr. Wadia herself may like to say something.
I told you when I went to National Hospital in 1956, and they said there was one young man who came here. He was so brilliant, and the nurses loved him. I told Feroza, we had to live up to his standard. He made a name and he went there to train.
He was a true ambassador. He was a true ambassador of India.
I grew up with him. So there are many memories. God bless him and God bless everyone. Yes, Meshram, Dr. Meshram, you want to continue this?
Yeah, you would like to invite others, panelists, to say something.
Any others?
I'd like to invite Professor Mrs. Wadia.
Thank you.
Firoza Wadia, to say something.
Yeah, thank you. There was a rare and special quality about the way my husband lived his life. Kindness came naturally to him, and he had this immense gift of immense patience to give enough time to his person who came to him and listen to him, even with a very busy practice, and listen to him no matter how small the request was or how humble the person who was making that request. He was a man of gentle judgments. He abhorred violence of any sort, verbal or physical. And he firmly believed, that no man was so bad that there was no good in him. And I always used to tease him that God has made special rose-colored glasses for Dr. N.H. Wadia, which he would put on his nose first thing in the morning and remove last thing at night. There was an air of warmth and compassion about him, and an air of humility, which was so endearing. But he often spoke of himself, of the lesson that life had taught him very early in his young life. This was in 1961, after the World Federation at Buenos Aires meeting. It had gone well for him. He had been elected on the tropical neurology subspecialty. He was sitting on the dais with big names, and he was feeling good. He had been invited to Chile, and he had been invited to Brazil for talks and lectures and all after that. And he thought, since I am in this part of the world, before going back home, he wanted to visit Peru and visit Machu Picchu. So he said, there I was one day, standing on the heights of Machu Picchu, looking down at the Urubamba River, feeling good about life. And the next day, I was lying in the dungeons of Cassius prison in Lisbon. That taught me a lesson, and I said to myself, Noshir, no matter how skilled or how learned you may become, avoid an intolerant and an arrogant attitude of mind. And since then, head down, whatever it was. I would feel happy if he got something. He said, head down, Noshir, head down. To him, becoming a doctor was a vocation. It wasn't a business to make money. He always wanted to become a doctor. It was a call which came from within him. And later on, he loved the art of healing and caring and teaching. I think some of the happiest days of his life were in his beloved JJ Hospital, amongst the sick and the poor, surrounded by his students. And later, at the Jaslok Hospital, I remember so well one very harrowing day. He had 2 or 3 bad patients in the ICU, full ward round, a long outpatient in the hospital, a crush of patients at his clinic. I think we must have ended up the day around about midnight or so. Next morning, he was bright and chirpy. He was an early bird. Early bird gets the worms. And he was whistling away. He used to be irritatingly cheerful in the morning, first thing as he got up. And he was whistling away and getting dressed. And I was looking at him and I said to myself, I said, where does he think he's going? He's got another long day at the hospital. So I asked him, I said, Noshu, where do you think you're going, on a picnic? And he said, Piroja, you don't know how lucky I am. I do what I love to do. I am excited every day of my life and I get paid for it. He won many awards, both national and international. Of course, he was happy and he felt honored to receive those awards. But he always used to say, okay, the best award is the appreciation and the recognition you get from your peers. The best award that a man can get is an appreciation from his peers. And so today, though he would be humbled, I'm sure that he would find it most satisfying that a lifetime's professional service, teaching, research has been recognized by his peers. Thank you.
Dr. Meshram, can I say a few points?
Yeah, sure.
The lighter side of it, there was a meeting in Manila. So we were, I think Firoza can close her ears. No, we had fun. We went together. And I told him he'll be my guest in Manila and on the way back in Singapore because I had family there. I remember sleeping 2 cots in a spare room in Manila in my friend's place, my family's place. On the way back, we stayed in Singapore, had a family there. Again, we had a room, 2 cots. And we spent a lot of time together. And there is a place called Change Alley in Singapore. I don't know any of you gone there? It's an alley that starts from one main road and the other end. It's a shopping center. It's a place where you bargain. And he got into a shop to buy something, I can't remember what. And we started bargaining. My cousin was next to me, said, please don't bargain here. I'll get you this, whatever you want. Because these guys are rough in that alley. I had such close moments with him. Many days we slept in the same room, 2 cots, very spare. And he could have gone to a hotel if he wanted to. But he preferred to stay like this with me. I thank him for that.
Thank you, sir.
The ship parked in Manila. You couldn't gamble in the city, but you can go to the ship and gamble there. I think Bhagwati went there.
I was there with you. I was there with you.
You were there?
Yeah.
Bhagwati went to these armed bandits, where they keep on doing that. He lost a lot of money. Then he came and said, this is the place where the gambling occurs. So I and Nosher went there. And first coin he put, he got a jackpot. So the thing was what to do with all the money. My cousin was there and we told him, we don't want to take this kind of money home. We got to finish it here. And that was very interesting. My friend took us to some places where we could enjoy. Manila, of course, I won't mention anymore. It was fun with him. He's so simple. He can be down to earth with you. Or he can be up in the sky. Oh, I know him so well and enjoyed his company. It's only sad that once, I think from an examination in JJ Hospital, I dropped him at home. But where the Lailavati Hospital, somewhere there his house was, I used to go and drop him on my way to Lokhandwala.
Yeah.
It was fun. It was not all neurology. It was fun. I call it living neurology. We lived it also. That was fun. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, madam, for those interesting comments which came straight from the heart. And I would also like to welcome Professor Raj Shakir and so many members from Dr. Wadia's family. And another family member I would like to invite now is Professor Sarosh Katrak to say something. Sarosh.
Thank you. I've always said that Dr. Wadia was an excellent neurologist, a dedicated teacher who gave very freely of himself, but above all, he was a humane human being. My association with him began in February 1970 in the Department of Neurology at JJ Hospital as a house officer. And this association continued up to his death in April 2016, a period of 47 years. A lot has been said about him today, but I would like to share with you some experiences which reflect the warm human being that he was. Dr. Wadia always had empathy towards his patients. Be they from a public hospital like JJ Hospital or from a private hospital like Jaslo. He always bonded with his patients and called them beta, son, irrespective of whether the patient was a male or female. It was somewhere between February and July 1970 that he had a poor patient from Uttar Pradesh who suffered from severe burning dysesthesia due to a nutritional neuropathy. And this patient would be lying on the bed with his hips and knees flexed and with his feet on the bed, hanging on the bed, and would be crying bitterly because of the pain. The first day Dr. Wadia came and the patient was crying to glory and said, "Saheb, mujhe bacha lo. Sir, please save me." And Dr. Wadia patted him on his shoulders and said, "Beta, rone ka nahi, sab theek ho jaye." I translate that, "Son, don't cry. Everything will become all right." This went on for a few days during the round, and after about a week, when Dr. Wadia came on the round, the patient hugged him by the waist and shouted, "Pitaji, mujhe bacha lo," meaning, "Father, please save me." And Dr. Wadia was a little aghast and said in his typical Parsi Gujarati, "Beti baap mane baap kaunsi banavyo?" Oh my God, how did he make me a father? So I, as a houseman, said that on the round, you keep calling him beta, beta, beta. So today you have become Pitaji. So initially, he gave me a little glaring look, and then after a little pause, he broke into a very sweet smile and winked at me, and we continued this round. The second thing that I would like to mention is that Dr. Wadia, as a mentor and as a teacher, believed that his duties as a teacher did not end when the candidate passed his exams. But he felt that his duties continued until that person was well established in life. When I wanted to start my private practice, I approached him and expressed my fears that I have always been in an academic milieu and had no concept about private practice. Promptly he said, "Sarosh, you are welcome to sit with me in my private consulting rooms at Ben Nevis and see how I practice. It should not difficult for you, as you have a knack for establishing a rapport with your patients at JJ Hospital." And I sat with him in his consulting rooms for 1 month. At the end of 1 month, he told me that I was ready for private practice. But he gave me 3 pieces of advice. In those days, people were fond of putting up their attachments on their letterhead. So Dr. Wadia didn't like that. And he told me that, "Sarosh, your letterhead should reflect your work and not your attachments." And I said, "Welcome, sir." And ever since that time, my letterhead bears none of my attachments, only the fact that I'm a consultant neurologist. The second advice that he gave me is, before your afternoon OPDs, please do not eat onions or garlic for lunch, because you'll have to go close to your patients to do fundoscopy. And you should not be reeking of onions and garlic. he always thought of his patients. The third piece of advice is that when you go to your consulting rooms, wash your face, clean yourself, and then apply eau de cologne or aftershave lotion so that you smell very pleasant when you examine your patients from close. And I have been following this advice throughout my career, and always there is a bottle. I began with Old Spice and I graduated to Pakoraba. But that was always there in my bottom drawer of my desk, consulting room desk. And I have always followed it. Now, the third episode is once Dr. Singhal has already alluded to the Swan Commission, etc. But I would like to tell you that how Dr. Wadia met Raisaku Kono. Once on his return from Japan, he was gleeful, like a little child. And he said, Sarosh, sometimes serendipity plays a chance in your career. I said, sir, what happened? He says, I was on the Swan Commission and I was giving my evidence in the Swan Commission. And he never believed that cleoquinol was responsible for Swan. So he gave an example in the court that we have seen cases of acute hemorrhagic conjunctivitis, and following that, there has been about 17 cases of a polio-like illness. Now, are the two diseases correlated or is it mere coincidence? After he stepped out of his witness box, having given his evidence, Raisaku Kono approached him and told him, I'm very interested in the remark that you have made. And Dr. Wadia asked him, what remark? About the conjunctivitis and the polio-like illness. Because I have found a virus, EV70, which is an enterovirus, which is a polioclastic virus. And Dr. Wadia came back very excited, stating, Sarosh, I was right. After a few months, and those were the days where we did not have internet and emails, Raisaku Kono wrote a letter to him in which he mentioned that I injected my virus into the spinal cord of, into the spinal theca of monkeys, and I have produced hind limb paralysis. Do you have any of your CSFs left? We did not have any CSFs left at that stage, but when the 1981 epidemic started and we collected 56 cases, Peter will remember that we said we sent pair samples to him in Japan and then clinched the diagnosis that EV70 was responsible for the polio-like illness yet seen. The last thing I would like to say is on a very personal note. Dr. Singhal will remember that when I was a housemate, there was a case of malignant papulosis, which he subsequently reported with Dr. Dastu. Now that patient had parietal lobe signs. I even to this day remember his name. His name was Sadashiv. And I requested Dr. Wadia to loan me Critchley's book on parietal lobe so that I could study that patient in detail. He was initially hesitant, but then he gave it to me with the promise that you will return this book. And sure enough, I labored with that patient for about 2 weeks, and then I returned the book to Dr. Wadia. I think it was around 2012 that he subsequently told me that he was giving his own private book collection to Sri Chitra Tirunal in Trivandrum. I told him, sir, there is only one book that I want from your collection. He said, which one? And I said, that is Critchley's Parietal Lobe. So he said, He said, yes. And then I didn't hear anything from him for about several months. And on my birthday in 2013, I get Critchley's Parietal Lobe as a present from Dr. Wadia. And I would like to read it. Actually, he wanted to give me the book on his birthday on the 20th of January 2013. And he wrote, for Sarosh, with every good wish and for long years of friendship. I do not know anyone else who will enjoy and treasure this landmark book. Affectionately, Noshir. This is what he inscribed, but he gave it to me on my birthday, which was in July, in which he wrote happy birthday and many more in good health and prosperity, affectionately. It's in his handwriting, but he's written Piroja and Noshir. And I think Piroja must have told him, don't give it on your birthday, give it to him on his birthday. And I still treasure this book. I note from this book that it was first published in 1953. And Dr. Wadia has written Noshir Wadia, London, 1953. So this is one of my prized possessions. The medical philosopher, William Osler, when he wrote on the attributes of a good physician, he wrote service, teaching, and research, always in that order. And I think Dr. Noshir Wadia is an epitome of that saying. He served the public, he taught students, and he taught them not only neurology, but how to behave in life with your patients. And I miss him. Sorry, I miss him a lot. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for that emotional words. Now I would like to invite Professor Sunil Pandya.
Thank you. Thank you. I've been listening with a lot of admiration to the various observations and comments that have been made so far. Every one of which is, of course, very true and very, very inspirational. I will restrict my remarks to a very short spell of time because I think there are others who also wish to talk. As has been emphasized, Dr. Wadia's chief interest was clinical neurology. And that was also his forte. And that is what he tried to pass on to everyone who trained with him, attended his clinics, attended his lectures and his seminars. A reference has been made to the weekly meetings which he held where students and teachers from other institutes would attend. And I must point out that it was not just students, but professors from other institutes. And I know of Dr. Bhandarkar, who was professor of endocrinology, who years later would remember that Dr. Wadia's seminars were of great value to him, although he was an endocrinologist. The other point I'd like to make is that almost up to the very end of his life, whenever he was called to see a patient on a consultation, although he was so senior and although he was so much appreciated and recognized, he always spent at least 15 to 20 minutes with each patient. It was not as if he would tell his registrar, go and see the patient, write the notes, come spend 2 minutes, write 2 lines and disappear. And again, almost up to the end of his life, he would write his note on the patient's case paper in his own handwriting, which had become somewhat scrawly by that time. And it would extend over 2 or 3 pages of the case notes. He would tell you what he had found. He would tell you the thoughts that went through his mind. He would tell you what his diagnosis was and why he made that diagnosis. And then, of course, he would make his suggestions. 2 more points and then I will stop. One is the importance he gave to autopsies. He and Dr. Gajendra Singh, my teacher in neurosurgery, both of them insisted that as far as possible, every patient who died in their wards should be autopsied. Now, it was not so difficult in neurosurgery because at that time we had a Coroner's Act. And the Coroner's Act stated that if there was a suspicion that this was an abnormal death, then an autopsy was mandatory. And any operation, it becomes an abnormal death. So for us to get autopsies was not very difficult. But for Dr. Wadia to get an autopsy was extremely difficult. And yet he succeeded in almost all his patients, getting his residents and by talking to relatives himself of getting an autopsy. And here, of course, he had this magnificent collaboration with Dr. Darab Dastoor, who justified the autopsy and who did full justice to the findings that were obtained from the autopsy. The last point I want to make is his loyalty to his alma mater. He loved the Grand Medical College and the JJ Hospital. As he approached seniority at the Jastrock Hospital, he noted that the college building, which Dr. Singhal showed in one of his slides as one of the oldest buildings of that campus, which is still standing. It is still standing even today. It dates back to 1845. It was being neglected by the administration and was in danger of falling to pieces. So Dr. Wadia set up a committee of like-minded individuals, collected funds and approached the government, which runs the Grand Medical College and JJ Hospital, with a plea, please use these funds to restore the college building to its original magnificence. It is an unfortunate fact that the bureaucrats and the minister did not show much interest. And eventually the funds that Dr. Wadia and his group had collected were used in buying books for the Grand Medical College Library and in offering scholarships to poor students at the Grand Medical College. But he spent years in this effort of trying to restore the old college building to its magnificence and to its historical stature. He was very fond of one particular book which Dr. Anil Patel possessed. And Dr. Singhal had shown you a slide showing Dr. Anil Patel. Dr. Anil Patel was a great bibliophile, and he had the art of finding rare books and he would collect them. And he collected a book which was written by the first principal of the Grand Medical College and JJ Hospital, whose name was Charles Moorhead. And this book, which was on the principles and practice of medicine, Anil Patel had. And eventually it was given to Dr. Wadia. And as Dr. Wadia gifted parietal lobes to Sarosh, Dr. Wadia gifted this Anil Patel's Moorhead's book to me. So I share a legacy, a rich, very, very important legacy with Sarosh Khatkar. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Now, Dr. Peter Mishra.
Thank you. I echo the sentiments that everyone has of their comments and have made so far. But I'd like to just mention that in my own personal experience of how I first actually set eyes on Dr. Wadia. It must have been in the late 70s when I was an undergraduate medical student, and I attended a lecture in this sort of amphitheater-like lecture hall, and there was Dr. Wadia doing a lecture demonstration on a patient with myasthenia gravis. Now, as all of you know, Dr. Wadia was always immaculately dressed. And on this occasion, he was absolutely immaculately dressed in a cream suit and a crimson tie and matching crimson socks. And I was bewitched by the theatrical demonstration which was going on before my eyes. He demonstrated all the signs of myasthenia gravis, fatiguing ptosis, fatiguing weakness. And then he got one of his residents to give the patient a tablet of pyridostigmine and then proceeded to very eruditely explain the pathophysiology of myasthenia and how the medication works. And then, of course, the patient came back on and Dr. Wadia demonstrated how the signs had miraculously disappeared and the patient was wheeled in on a wheelchair, in fact, wheeled in the wheelchair out in front of him to the applause of the whole audience. So that was absolutely brilliant. It made me think, gosh, this is fantastic. Who is this man? I would like to be like this man. But then the next thing that happened was very telling, that people were leaving the lecture theater and the patient's relatives, they were elderly couple because the patient was a young man, came up to Dr. Wadia and started asking him something. Now, the normal practice for all the consultants I had seen at JJ would be they would ask their registrar to go and talk to the patient's relatives and just brush them off. But not Dr. Wadia. He actually sat them down and spent time talking to them and just talk to them like you would talk to a friend. And I thought this is a very special attribute in a man, which I think Piroja and Sarosh have talked about, that he had a generosity which was amazing. You know, it's very unusual to see that sort of generosity in anyone. So, of course, after all this lecture, I got really interested in neurology and I ran off to the library and got myself a copy of Brain's textbook of neurology and started reading. And ultimately, one thing led to another. I got to actually work with Dr. Wadia. And that just amplified my original observations that he was a man of utmost compassion and he was never angry. I've never seen him really being angry with anybody. Regardless, I mean, we must have upset him numerous times, but he never had a harsh word. In fact, he always had a twinkle in his eye and a lopsided smile, his characteristic smile. And those were things which I will never forget about Dr. Wadia. And the way he was courteous to everyone, regardless who they were, the lowest of the low or the highest of the high, with the same courteous treatment. And his enthusiasm and his energy put us all to shame. And the way that he would actually analyze cases, and he would never try to fall into the trap of putting a round peg into a square hole. He would always notice the differences and then record them meticulously. And then that was the reason for his great scientific success. So really, when I think back at it, I think what actually attracts all of us to Dr. Wadia. And I think there's one word which actually sums it all up, and it's the word charisma. And I looked in the dictionary, and this is what the dictionary definition of charisma is. It's a compelling charm which inspires devotion in others. And I think that's why we are all here today. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And we are waiting for your new book. And I would like to now invite Dr. Satish Khadilkar, who edited the book, Neurological Practice with Dr. Wadia, to speak up. Satish.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chandrasekhar. basically, a lot has already been said, and I'll restrict myself to the experience with the book. I think it was one of these continuums that Professor Katrak holds, where the session was over and we were sort of walking back, and Dr. Wadia put his hand on my shoulder and said, I'm going to do the second edition of the book, and I need a hand. So in the evening, we talked again on the phone, and we sort of decided that we work on the second edition. And I think it was very educative for me the next few months that we worked on. He was very precise as to what he wanted from his authors. He gave them very clear instructions. And most interestingly, when the manuscripts came back, he not only read them, he wanted to see all the references. He wanted me to get the originals of all the references and cross-references so he could make sure that what has been quoted by the author in the right context, which involved a lot of work, but I think it was fascinating as to how he put some of the things that the authors had originally put differently. The other issue was that he worked on hard copies. He worked on, he sort of hand wrote his comments on hard copies, and I worked on the computer at that time. So, and the other thing was he wanted to make changes, and he again wanted to make changes, and he again wanted to make changes. So he would write something, we would change it, and he'll again say, I want to make more changes. So I requested him that please use different color pens so that on those hard copies, I know what precedes what. So we sort of worked like that, and he worked from his home most of the time because his mobility was limited at that time. But his intellect was so sharp that he really could dissect what the authors had sort of put up and make very, very useful comments in most of the chapters, which were so varied in the textbook. And lastly, I think Dr. Mrs. Wadia will remember that when the book started coming to an end, he started feeling that I had worked much more than him. And he one day said that he doesn't want his name in it. Now it's his book where I was helping. And he said, I don't want my name in this. So I had to plead with him. He wouldn't agree. So we went to Dr. Mrs. Wadia and requested her to please tell Professor Wadia, look, it's his book that I'm doing, and his name has to be there. So as you will see in the final product, he's called himself corresponding editor, and he's sort of put my name as the editor. So that I think was a terrific experience. Also, he had finished most of his practice at that time. He was not actively working, but patients still called him for advice and they wanted to know. So when we were working and a patient would call, it was absolutely fantastic to see how much they mattered to him. He always took their calls. He always wanted to give them the right advice. Since he was not in practice, there were some to whom he would say, can this man come to JJ? Because I used to go to JJ at that time. So like everyone has said, his respect for everyone, for the basic human dignity was absolutely fascinating. And lastly, I think during this time, he also signed my National Academy form that Dr. Singhal sort of mentioned. And he not only signed, he saw the whole form. He sort of looked up what I had written, made his useful suggestions, and then he signed. So I think it was a fantastic experience all in all. And there are many other things, but I think it's quite late and already a lot has been said. So Chandrasekhar, thank you very much for giving me a chance to speak.
Yeah. Thank you, Satish. And Professor Wadia had called me and expressed his desire to release this book during, I was a IN president that time, and to release this book during the INCon at Chandigarh. And I said, sir, it will be an honor to, release this during the conference. But he personally had called me that whether it will be possible.
Chandrasekhar, the first edition was released in 2005 when I was the president of the IAN.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
And Professor Yun Kimura released the book.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we, like Sunil Pandya mentioned, there is some common bond between you and me also.
Thank you, sir. Now I would like to invite Dr. Ravi Shankar, K. Ravi Shankar. Ravi?
Thank you, Mishram. I will just share my slides. Thank you, Mishram. We have just heard from Professor Singhal and all the other speakers, the outstanding qualities which made Dr. Wadia legendary in his lifetime. He was a teacher par excellence, and every student of his would have a different story to tell. But what I'm going to recall is the important role of Dr. Wadia in establishing the headache clinic at Jasloke Hospital. But for him and his intervention, this headache clinic would not have taken off. And through this brief presentation, I would like to also narrate the admirable qualities of Dr. Wadia beyond his academic and clinical brilliance. We go back to 1994. Why do I say that he was a true visionary? When I expressed a desire to go abroad and train in headache, he asked me to shortlist the centers where I would like to work. I went to him with leading centers in the US. He looked at it and said, give me some time, let me think it over. And then he told me that it is best if you go to Dr. Nainan Matthew at Houston and work with him, because he said that he is from Vellore. He has an idea of the Indian scenario. And when you come back and would like to set up a headache clinic, it might be best to train with somebody who is an Indian and who is on top of his subject in the US. And so he next day handed over to me this letter of introduction to Dr. Matthew. And with this, there was no difficulty at all in getting accepted. And when I came back after training with Dr. Matthew, we got to see what a large-hearted mentor Dr. Wadia was, because it should have been easy to establish a headache clinic at Jasloke given his stature. But the trustees were not easily willing. They had two questions. They wanted to know what more through a headache clinic can we do, which we cannot do through a routine neurology OPD. And they also thought it was not a financially viable project. So that's when they reluctantly, because it was Dr. Wadia making the request for this project, they said that we will give you 1 year. And if you can show us the numbers at the end of 1 year, then we would allow this clinic to function. And Dr. Wadia strategized at this point of time in a very fair manner. He told me to start the clinic on the same day that he had his OPD, Thursday. And the first few patients, quite a number of patients that we saw at our headache clinic, were patients who were referred to Dr. Wadia for his opinion on headache. And he just told me that if there are any difficult cases, we will discuss them jointly. And he would phone up the registration counter of the hospital and tell them that all these cases are to be recorded as headache clinic patients. So with this type of a strategy, at the end of 1 year, we were able to convince the trustees that this was definitely a viable proposition. Dr. Wadia had an uncanny ability to grasp the nuances of all subspecialties. Why do I tell you this? We started in 1995. In 2004, this was one of the subjects at the European Headache Congress. There was a hot topic, a debate on guidelines for migraine treatment, the American viewpoint and the European viewpoint. This was in 2004. But 8 years prior, when I came back from the US, Dr. Wadia told me, it is not enough that you have trained in the US. I want you to spend some time with Dr. Marcia Wilkinson in London. And so he wrote off another letter, and I spent some time with Marcia Wilkinson. And as a result of that, I was able to write this article in this monograph on headache clinics, comparing the style of practice in USA, UK, and India. So all credit to Dr. Wadia for his understanding that there is a difference between the style of practice across the Atlantic. Now in 2000, we organized the first headache meeting in India. And at that time, I went and told him that this is the month we are planning to start. He right away said, we should get Professor Jim Lance to be on the faculty. And I said, he is not available till December. So he said, let's move the meeting, because he strongly believed that the right faculty, as you would have seen from the EMG conferences of Mrs. Wadia, which Dr. Singhal showed, the right faculty lends credibility to the meeting. And he wrote a personal letter to Professor Lance, and we had a wonderful faculty, which included Professor Lance, Nainan Matthew, and Sai Solomon from New York. And there in the front row, you see Dr. Wadia. He sat through from morning till evening, right through the 2 days of the meeting, wrote notes in longhand, as Khadilkar had just mentioned. And at the end of the day, 2 days, he handed over to me 12 handwritten pages. And those were included in this proceedings of that meeting, which we brought out subsequently. Now, he also believed that for a meeting to be successful, it's not only the topic, but also not the theme, but also the timing, which has to be right. So in 2004, when we had a Just Look Neurosciences meeting, of which headache was one of the topics, he just saw my list of topics, and then he asked me, what's the most recent thing happening in the headache field? And I said, the classification has just been revised, it has been released. And he right away said, that is going to be the theme of our headache meeting. And so therefore you please call Professor Ollison, who is the father, considered the father of the classification. And he asked him to release the classification to the Indian audience. And this is Dr. Wadia greeting Professor Ollison. So he knew all that was recent, but even out of that, he knew what was necessary and topical for a meeting of this type. Now, Dr. Khadilkar would recall, Dr. Wadia always believed, and as he has already mentioned, he would not believe in publishing without enough data. So when the first edition of his book was brought out, there was no chapter on headache. He has also mentioned this in the preface, that we do not have a chapter on headache as there is inadequate data. Then 10 years later, he asked me to collect all the Indian articles on headache. He had a look at it, and then he gave me the opportunity to write this chapter on headache in his book, which I'm still proud of and thankful to both Dr. Wadia and Dr. Khadilkar. What I think was his life mantra, as Mrs. Wadia has already mentioned to us, I think the one common thread which you see across all the speakers, Dr. Wadia believed in this: the more you give, the more you get. And even this is a picture from 2014, when he was not keeping too well. We had this headache meeting, and you can see him in the front row. He came to attend all our meetings. He spent time with the international faculty, made them feel comfortable. And all his students would probably echo the same sentiments. And with gratitude, we all would say, we owe it to you, sir, for what we are today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ravi Shankar. Thank you so much. Now I would like to invite Professor Raj Shakir, who had a very close relation with Professor Wadia.
Thank you very much, Chandrasekhar. It's an honor to be here today. Well, I first met Professor Wadia in Kyoto in 1981 World Congress, and he sought me out. And I had my first ever poster in the World Congress there. And he looked at it and said, young man, just want you to join the tropical neurology research group of the WFN. So he did me a huge favor by bringing me into the WFN and to the tropical neurology world. And our relationship continued. It's now 40 years. The next meeting was in Hamburg, and I met Noshir there. And at that time, he was working, and many of you were working hard to get with Chopra, to get the Congress to New Delhi in '89. So at that time, we had another meeting of the tropical neurology field group, and I was made secretary working with him as president. And the relationship continued, and advice continued, even the advice whether I should run for Secretary Treasurer General in Sydney. Following that, should I run for president? And his thoughtfulness and encouragement was essential in my decision. If you look at this book, the history of, you all know it, this is Johan Arley's book, The History of the World Federation. If you look at the index, I think there are 12 mentions of Noshir Wadia, including a chapter on his escapades when he came back from Latin America and was stuck in that prison in Lisbon for 3 months. I think it was a very long time. And the pictures of the horrible state he was in are all detailed in the book. And this is why when I, as Secretary General, and it says Raj Shakir proposed in 2008 that the WFN should establish 2 WFN medals. One was service to international neurology and one for scientific achievement. And I propose Noshir to be the first recipient of services to international neurology. Although we heard a lot about his achievements in India, in his own country, which are immense, but his achievements and his recognition across the world are as much as the recognition in India. And this is why he was awarded the first ever medal of the WFN, which he took very graciously. And I met him after that. And when he was slightly unwell, I had the honor of visiting him and Piruja in their flat in Mumbai. And I had a very nice afternoon tea with him and his wife. And I will never forget, we have a very nice photograph in his flat. And he always asked me, and he was always interested, what are you doing? What's the WFN doing? And he liked the little things about politics, which I always kind of gave him bits of gossip, which he liked to hear. So Noshir is somebody I will never forget. And he's somebody who has we owe him a huge debt in the international fields, especially in the World Federation. So this is a most appropriate recognition of a real figure in international neurology. Thank you for asking me to give this little kind of comment on the man's immense achievements throughout his life. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. And when I was secretary and later president, he would, make it a point to write the emails that how the organization would move and what is expected. And he always encouraged, and he and Professor Singhal was very, encouraging words that I should, after the Indian Academy of Neurology, I should go to the WFN and take interest in the activities of WFN. So thank you. And now I would like to invite, if anybody would like to make any comments, Kailash or anybody, Professor Yuzi Kazi, Steve. Kailash Bhatia would like to say? Kailash?
Thank you very much, Chandrasekhar. So much has been said, and I completely echo all of that, particularly his empathy with the patients, which I think has been mentioned a number of times. That really helps a young practitioner, and how to deal with people and with the families and the relatives of these conditions which we treat with, which are so difficult. I mean, my own, the other thing which I think I want to say is about how he would facilitate and help people. And I can only tell you from my own example. I did this paper with Noshir Wadia, as you all heard about, with NMS. And he said to me, you know, Dikra, you should go abroad. And I was telling him, you know, I'm from a middle-class family. My father was very against this idea. He wanted me to start practice and earn money. And he said, money will come. And then he told me, why don't you call your father to meet me? And my father also to do photography. And I think maybe Mrs. Wadia will remember. So he called my dad to do some portraits of him. And at that time, which I didn't know at that time, but he talked to my father and he said, listen, you know, I see something in your son, he should go abroad. And this, my father told me later, and with much reservation, and, you know, he planned my trip. He planned me meeting with Sir John Badenoch. He planned me meeting with Anita Harding, and got me a small loan. And that's how I actually came to England. So he really planned and facilitated and helped people. And even, as I said, talked to my father without my knowledge, which I only came to know about later. So he was an amazing man, and we all really miss him. And all of us here have echoed that we are where we are because of him. And I thank him immensely.
Thanks, Kailash. Anybody would like to say?
Excuse me. Yes. I'd like to thank for this opportunity to just attend this, join this very impressive lectures. And I think what he has done for WFN has been mentioned by Rad, and I'd like to mention his contribution to Asian and Japanese society. In 1981, that Rad has mentioned, we had a WCN meeting in Kyoto. At the time, I was just a resident and not truly determined to become a neurologist, but I think he gave a lecture on SMON, cleoquinol intoxication. That was very prevalent and a social problem in Japan at that time. And later on, I saw a series of publications of his. There was a number of SMON patients, drug-induced into intoxication outside Japan, co-authored with P.K. Thomas and some others. And then I knew that he was just giving the right consideration into that tragic situation. And I think he is still honorary member of Japanese Society of Neurology. And SMON is one of the reasons I became a neurologist at the time. And I truly thank his contribution to that field. And also I'd like to mention his contribution to Asian neurology, AOAN, and other activities as well. So I do think he's done a lot for the world neurology and also Asian neurology. And I'm pretty much impressed by his life and words given by his pupils and friends. And thank you for making this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Yuji Kazi. Anybody else would like to say something?
Yeah. Just showing his commitment to neurosciences. In one of the meetings in Chandigarh, I was sitting in the restaurant in the hall downstairs, and I was shocked. Noshir coming in a wheelchair. And I asked him, he said, no, I wanted to attend the meeting and I can't do this walking. See there. Just a commitment of the person, even when he is not fully able. Same thing, next wheelchair was Dalal. These are the two people I've known for such a long time. I could have never imagined going to a meeting in a wheelchair, but must attend the meeting. That kind of commitment.
Yeah, and talking about the commitment, he was once talking about this cerebral ataxia, hereditary cerebral ataxia, SCA2, with the cerebral ataxia with slow eye movements. So he had seen a patient, and then he asked the person to get the family members to Mumbai. The patient was from Madhya Pradesh and relatively poor family. And he said, there are many people in the family who are affected. And he asked to get the people to Mumbai. He said, we can't, it is not possible. But then he told there is one, and Dr. Vadia said that I want to examine all the patients and take the blood samples and process them and find out why you are getting this problem. He said, what we can't get into the Mumbai, but there is a wedding in the family. So you can come to Narsinghpur, which is in Madhya Pradesh near Jabalpur. And during that time, everybody will come to the wedding and you can examine them and take the blood samples. So Professor Vadia traveled by flight from Mumbai to Nagpur by the evening flight, and he traveled on road, which were very bad those days, for 7 hours
I don't know
during the night, and then reached to the wedding venue in the morning and examined all the patients, took their blood samples. So that was a commitment, to the research that is shown. Anybody would like to say something? Yeah, I think it was a wonderful session, and I think it was started on a great note by Professor B.S. Singhal, and the way he, thrown a light on his life history. It was really wonderful. And the way Professor Singhal always, tells the tale and tells the life and his biography, I think it was really wonderful and we really enjoyed. I think he did a remarkable job and made it, not only made it, it went very interesting and very educative. Thank you so much, sir. And would like to thank Professor Arjun Das for chairing this very important session. And in fact, it was Professor Singhal's desire that Professor Arjun Das should chair this session. Thank you so much. And I would like to thank Professor Sunil Pandya, Madam Dr. Firoza Vadia, Dr. Sarosh Katrak, Peter Mishra, Satish Khadilkar, Dr. Ravi Shankar, Professor Raj Shakir, Professor Grisol, Dr. Mohit Bhatt, IAN President Professor J.M.K. Murthy, and Steve Lewis, and Dr. Marianne Visser, and the family members of Dr. Vadia, and President-elect Dr. Nirmal Surya, Professor Steve Lewis, and Professor Marco Medina. I think it was a wonderful session. And before I end, I would like to pay tribute to my very close friend and another past president of Indian Academy of Neurology, Dr. Ashok Parangaria, whom we lost recently. And it was a great loss to Indian Academy of Neurology. And I would like to mention that the next session will be in the month of August, and it will be on headache. Specialist, Professor James Lance and Professor Peter Gorsby will talk about James Lance. Thank you very much, and see you next month, the first Saturday of August. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chandrasekhar.
Yes.
Thank you, Chandra.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Mishra.
Thank you, Professor.
Goodbye, Firoja.